Hi, welcome to your neighborhood group. Today we study three parables from Luke chapter 15, the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Now, as you know, a parable is another word for story, and I think all of us have a story that we can relate to on some basic level when it comes to losing something. So let's start with this before we really get into our study. Talk about a time that you lost or found something valuable. Share as many details as you can. What was it? What did you do? What happened as a result? But a time that you lost or found something valuable. As we look at these parables from Luke chapter 15, it's interesting to me how all of this starts. It says in verses 1 and 2 that while Jesus was teaching, some tax collectors and sinners had gathered around to hear him. And this bothered the Pharisees. They, of course, were the religious leaders of the day. It's funny to me that tax collectors were differentiated from sinners in that passage. In other words, they were so evil and detested that they actually had their own category of corruption, as if to say there were sinners and even the tax collectors. Now, I don't want to offend anyone in your group who happens to work for the IRS, but in Jesus' time, there was actually good cause for that. You see, the tax collectors were both feared and despised, and they would station themselves outside of a city, usually in the middle of a major road or thoroughfare, and they could impose whatever tax they wanted. And since they worked for the government, and they usually paid the government its fees up front, the authorities would send soldiers to help enforce whatever tax was imposed. So, if the tax collector wanted to tax you for having, say, 2 axles on your carriage, they would. Or for how many bags you packed for your journey, they did. Or for how many animals you had in your caravan, no hesitation whatsoever. And of course, as long as the government got its take, the tax collectors raked in the profit. In fact, most of them became very wealthy essentially by stealing money from hardworking citizens, which of course added insult to injury. So Jesus hears these Pharisees mumbling. He hangs out with tax collectors and sinners. And I'm sure it bothered them because the Pharisees, they thought of themselves as an elitist group. After all, the rabbis chose only the best of the best students to follow them. Jesus welcomed the worst. So, to address this, Jesus tells them this parable. 3 stories that contrasted the radical scope of God's love and Jesus' mission with the exclusiveness of the Pharisees. He says, a shepherd has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders off. Will he not leave the 99 to go look for the one? And when he finds it, will he not joyfully put it on his shoulders, call his friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep? Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins, and she loses one. Will she not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, will she not call her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me, I found my lost coin? After each story, he ends by saying, I tell you, in the same way, there is much rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people that don't need to repent. I want to stop right now and just do some celebrating in our groups because some of you have a reason to rejoice. You have a story that's similar to this, a story that says, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I want to encourage maybe 1 or 2 people from your group to share a testimony of how you became a follower of Jesus Christ. And I want you to describe the adventure that you've been on ever since. Let's take a moment and have 2 or 3 people share their story. The third parable that Jesus tells in this series is the parable of the lost or prodigal son. He says a man had two sons, and the younger son had asked for his inheritance early, which went against all the cultural norms, but the father goes ahead and gives it to him anyway. And the Bible tells us that the son goes out and he squanders his wealth and wild living. He finally comes to his senses, he swallows his pride, and he comes back to the father. There are two observations that I would make from that parable. First is the father's reaction. I think my favorite verse has to be verse 20. And it says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, ran to him, and hugged him. This tells me that the father's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon for his wayward son. In fact, notice what he says next. Hey, let's kill the fattened calf. Let's put a ring on his finger. Let's put some sandals on his feet. Let's give him a robe. By the way, all of those were signs that this son was welcomed back into the family. That tells us a lot about the father. But the second observation that I would make is about how the good son reacted. The good son says, hey, wait a minute, time out. I've been here the whole time. I've been doing the right thing. I've been a good guy. And his father says, yes, but this son of mine was dead and is now alive. He was lost, but now is found. Now, friends, I know this story has a great ending. But for some of us, this story is playing out all too painfully in our families. I think a lot of us have someone who embodies the prodigal son in our own families. And I think many of us have a story that we could share about that. Maybe it's a brother or a sister. Maybe it's a son or a daughter. Someone who has made a decision that's led them down a dangerous road. It's harming them. It might be destroying your family, but it's certainly eroding relationships. For many of us, that pain is real and those wounds are fresh. I want us, over the next few moments, to share about someone in your family that kind of embodies the prodigal son. Share as many details as you feel comfortable with, and I want you to take a moment and pray for them by name. Let's encourage each other over the next few minutes. Notice in all of these stories that something valuable was missing, that it was cause for an all-out search, and when found, it warranted a great celebration. You see, Jesus knew the power of stories, and in these parables, he reminds all of us of his mission. He invites all of us to be part of his rescue story, to take part in redeeming the lost. The world loves a great rescue story. On Thursday, August 5th, 2010, 33 miners at the San Jose mine in Chile became trapped under several tons of rubble when the mine caved in. They were more than 2,000 feet beneath the surface. Now, the outlook wasn't very good. In fact, even if they had lived through the collapse, most of them would likely starve to death or die before aid could arrive. In fact, so bleak were the circumstances that when other miners had heard about the plight, they came to the site and hammered 33 crosses into the ground, fearing that the mine had become their tomb. After all, they'd already lost 8 people in that mine years prior to this incident. On the slim chance that they could locate the miners, crews on the surface drilled 9 holes into the ground in hopes of finding any evidence of their survival. Miraculously, 17 days later, one of the drill bits hit a hollow spot deep below the earth where the miners had gathered. As the tiny drill bit extracted from the chasm, attached was this message: "We're great down here in the refuge." Signed, the 33. What ensued was one of the largest search and rescue operations in world history. Chile would enlist the help and expertise from countries around the world. They would combine their resources. They would coordinate their efforts. Now, their plan was radical: to drill down to them and build an escape capsule large enough to hoist them out. NASA would be summoned to design the capsule. The process would take over 2 months. It would cost tens of millions of dollars, but it was worth it. Finally, some 2 months or 69 days later, with more than 1,700 journalists from 39 countries assembled and a worldwide viewing audience of over 1 billion people, all 33 of them were pulled to safety one by one. It was the single most watched event in world history. Why? Because the world loves a great rescue story. And I want to ask, who do you think was more excited in those moments? Was it the ones who had found life again, or the rescuers who had given it to them? The answer is both of them were equally excited. Friends, do you see the similarities? Maybe there are times when you feel overwhelmed at reaching this valley for Jesus Christ. And if you're not careful, maybe you've already staked a cross into the ground and given up on reaching your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. Maybe it seems easier for you to stay on the surface, or to stay in your Christian bubble, or to make your group a holy huddle. But friends, there is a world out there that is dying to see Jesus. And God invites all of us to be a part of his great rescue story. It's time to coordinate our efforts, to combine our resources. And just think, with all of our campuses, with hundreds of neighborhood groups joining in this effort, with tens of thousands of people that call this place home, what if each one reached one? And then they reached one, and so on, and so on, and so on. You see, it's stories like these where Jesus reminds all of us that eternity is worth the effort. What if we joined Jesus' mission because something valuable is missing? It is cause for an all-out search, and when found, it warrants a great celebration. The takeaway for your group today is this: each one, reach one. Each person in the room should name that person that you know who needs to find Jesus, and I want you to pray for them by name. Now, don't forget, this is the person that you're going to intentionally invest in and invite to church. Or who is the neighbor that you're going to connect with to help change their eternal zip code? Share who that person is, and then as a group, pray for them by name.